What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Dirty Bird Fly Through. Before we get started, really quickly, make sure you hit like, you subscribe, you share it if you haven't already. Also, make sure you check out my other social media platforms, my X handle, and I'm now on TikTok. So if you want shorter analysis, you like it, quickly and microwaved, that is now on TikTok for you. So, obviously, Sunday night did not go as planned for the Falcons. Coming into San Francisco with two straight wins, momentum on their side, it looked like the Falcons stood a great chance to get a third straight victory, but obviously that is not what happened. The San Francisco 49ers defeated the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday Night Football by a final score of 20-10. San Francisco improves to 5-2 on the year. The Falcons fall to 3-3 on the year after winning two straight games. Really a fallback down to reality for the Falcons and where they are. So there was a lot that went wrong, I feel like, for the Falcons in this game. And, I think all that really did truly bring us back down to reality, because my number one concern heading into this game was being able to stay focused and being able to really maintain that tenacity and that mentality of stacking wins and not getting complacent for a team that is still pretty unfamiliar to this territory, obviously, of prime time. This is only the second year the Falcons have had a lot of prime time showing and a lot of stock put into them. But obviously, this being a young team coming off a win like the one you had versus Buffalo, that obviously, look, builds momentum, and it's still a foundation win. It's a signature win, but you have to build off of that, and you got to go out to San Francisco. This is a game against a team that is in the playoff race with you, that you really, this is one of these critical games that you have to get these head-to-head tiebreakers, and you had an opportunity to with the 49ers having a lot of injuries. However, you were not able to maintain focus. You let a lot of these guys for San Francisco come out, and these were guys that you had never even heard of. And they ended up absolutely running amok on you, especially on defense. The Falcons' offense was not able to get anything going all night. It felt like at a consistent pace. We saw flashes, but we never saw anything fully materialize outside of early in the game. The Falcons did have a long drive early in the game going into the second quarter. It really felt like the Falcons were going in the right direction. That drive stalled. They had to settle for a field goal, and after that, the only points we got was a Bijan Robinson touchdown late in the third quarter to cut the game close. But in the end, after that, it was all San Francisco. The Falcons did have opportunities, but ultimately, the 49ers did get the win, and I think it, proved really where this Falcons team was. It proves that, this is a team that can be good, but they're not at that point of being great yet. I think there was a lot of hope heading into this year about what the ceiling of this Falcons team could be, but I think it's clear and obvious that we see the Falcons still do have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of promise, but there is also a lot of work to do. This was a win that I really think could have propelled this team to potentially being great. Obviously, they did not get it. And the way that they played, I believe, really did show us that there's a lot more to work on than, we realize, obviously, coming off of a big win like Buffalo, that really can cloud your brain and, the perception of what this team actually is. Now, talking about the game in general, there were a lot of missed opportunities for the Falcons all night on offense. I talked about and mentioned the drive early in the game where it felt like we had the run game going nicely. We were passing the ball effectively. Guys were getting involved. Kyle Pitts got involved tonight. I kind of called that. I said this could be a game to watch out for Kyle Pitts going over the middle. He did not go over the middle. It was a lot of things to the sidelines, but he still did get involved. However, none of that was able to materialize. You had a 20 play drive that ended in 3 points. You had an opportunity right before halftime to get a field goal, but for the second straight week, mistakes right before halftime cost you in the end. And in the second half, you were driving in the fourth quarter. You had an opportunity. And I mean, the defense, as much as the defense did have its own troubles stopping, obviously, the guy who was the best player on the field last night, we know who that was. The defense still did give you opportunities to win pretty late into this game. You just did not take advantage. And when you look at that drive in the fourth quarter, you had two opportunities to get 1 yard to keep that drive going. And the Falcons were only down three at that point. A field goal obviously could have tied the game up, but I truly think that you this is a NFL today where playing it conservative almost in a sense is not really that popular. We do see a lot of teams tend to play it more aggressively. Now, granted, we do kick that field goal. Maybe it's a different conversation. Maybe not. But at the end of the day, you had 4th and 1. It made sense to go for it, but your best player on the field on that 4th and 1 was he wasn't even on the field. Bijan Robinson, I don't even think was on the field for that 4th and 1. You had 3rd and 1, and of all plays, you do a toss run to Bijan Robinson. That you should have ran it right up the middle, and I think that gets into what I'm going to also talk about. The Falcons, it feels like they get too cute when they're not supposed to. That's not just been an issue this year. That's been an issue, it feels like, for the longest time. But the good teams, you notice, when it is time, we saw it with San Francisco. When it was time to get down to it, they got down to it. They relied on their best player. Christian McCaffrey got going all night, and they did not go away from him. They knew that he was going to be their offense. George Kittle did not catch a single pass all night, but George Kittle was so effective run blocking that he made up for all of it. It was the Christian McCaffrey show. It's what the Falcons defense obviously allowed it to turn into, but the fact that the offense was not putting enough pressure on San Francisco, also has to be recognized. It was a team loss. There were a lot of missed opportunities. This was a game that, all things considered, the Falcons defense did keep the Falcons in, but the Falcons were ultimately not able to come up with a victory. And now, obviously, one of the big things, just period, that the Falcons really struggled in was the battle of the trenches. San Francisco absolutely whooped the Falcons' butts in the trenches, both on offense. We had seen the Falcons' defense really get manhandled the most they had been all season by that 49ers offensive line. We had seen them, just opening up holes for Christian McCaffrey. They could not stop McCaffrey for the most part, especially in those, critical times late in the game. We did see the defense somewhat do better than the offensive side of the trenches, which was just absolutely abysmal. Bijan Robinson, I believe, had 14 carries for 41 yards, and at the end of the day, that goes into blocking. And the offensive line had easily their worst game of the season. Everything got blown up. And it's really also a lot of the reason why the Falcons did lose, because San Francisco and Robert Saleh were able to absolutely eviscerate that offensive line. Now, obviously, you do have to give credit to one guy on San Francisco more than anyone else. That is CMC. He had an amazing night. And, he really did put the dagger into the Falcons defense like we really hadn't seen. Just 6 days prior, we saw the Falcons absolutely dominate Josh Allen. And, 6 nights later, as we saw, Christian McCaffrey just felt like had his way the entire night. 24 carries, 129 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. He led the way receiving with 7 catches for 72 yards. So Christian McCaffrey had 200 scrimmage yards tonight. Bijan Robinson went from on Monday Night Football having 200 scrimmage yards 6 nights later, it was Christian McCaffrey who did it on Sunday night. And he was a more effective running back, and that was also a very big indication of, the 49ers. They were the better team, and they were in a better position to win overall because their star was able to be more effective because at the end of the day, Kyle Shanahan, he leaned into him. He knew what he had to do to win this game. Now, I did mention the O line, obviously. They had an absolute letdown. It really did feel like for the offensive line, they had been having a very strong season so far, particularly, Elijah Wilkinson, who it felt like was good for about maybe one false start a game, but outside of that, he was able to hold his own up until last night. And he got absolutely eviscerated. Bryce Huff was around all night. We saw the 49ers blitz all night, and it made life hell for that offensive line, and in the process made life hell to get anything going on offense. It truly did feel like that, even though you could blame some of this on play calling, that this offense truly did struggle because they were in absolute hell because the offensive line could not stop a nosebleed of that 49ers defense coming after them. And in that process, Michael Penix took an absolute beating last night. And we saw late in the game, quarterback hit after quarterback hit after quarterback hit. Michael Penix was clearly beaten up late in that game. And honestly, it even led to, I think, a lot of people wondering why was he still in there? Why didn't you just put Kirk Cousins in to finish off the game when it was 20-10? And you could clearly see Michael Penix was being beaten up. Obviously, Penix is not going to quit. He wants to be out there. This is his team. He is the quarterback. But considering his injury history so far, you cannot let him get beaten up like that. He's obviously going to want to toughen it out, but you have to put your quarterback in good situations for his health to continue to be out there. And, it led to Michael Penix, having some big underthrows. It was definitely a shaky night for him. He had a fumble that was recovered by the 49ers. So, in the end, look, they made Michael Penix look like a young quarterback. He looked like a quarterback that was making his ninth start and still had some work to do. And obviously, you cannot shield Michael Penix totally from some of the blame. But I also think that at the end of the day, this really more so it was on the offensive line, and particularly Elijah Wilkinson. And for someone who had been doing relatively well, I don't think we will see Elijah Wilkinson be benched this week. I would expect him to get another opportunity. However, if we now see that teams are going to try to replicate what the 49ers did and put a lot of pressure on Wilkinson, it might only be a matter of time before he is replaced, and maybe we see a Storm Norton come back and fill that role. But, if not, you're definitely, I think, going to have to game plan properly for how to protect Michael Penix's blind side, because that clearly was an issue all night, as the entire offensive line was. But Wilkinson was the sore thumb that it felt like stuck out above all of the others. Now, obviously, another big thing that really it felt like when this happened did change the game. Divine Diablo suffered an injury, I believe, early in the second quarter. It was a forearm injury. Hopefully, it's nothing serious. I don't know the severity of it yet. I would expect we will find out probably later today when the team is fully back in and they do the press conference, give us the updates. But Divine Diablo has been very critical for the Falcons' defensive success so far, and we're going to need him out there. We saw that really once he left, Christian McCaffrey was able to take off. It felt like he could have been the one guy to hold McCaffrey in check, but once he was out, man, there was nobody on the Falcons who could go one on one with McCaffrey. Considering obviously Jalen Walker being out, that changed kind of the role Kane Ellis had to play. So you put J.D. Bertrand up against Christian McCaffrey. That is a nightmare written all over it. So definitely hope, especially with the Miami Dolphins having another spectacular running back in Devon Achan, who is one of their stars in what has been their abysmal season. You want Divine Diablo back for that game. Now, I do have one game ball to give out. It's hard to give out a game ball, after a performance like this, but I do got to give it out to this guy. I'm giving it to Zach Harrison. Zach Harrison has been someone who, for a couple years, we've been asking who's going to be that young guy to step up. The Falcons, it feels like a lot of day two, early day three of these young offensive lineman draft picks. And the question has been who is going to step up. And when Grady Jarrett departed this offseason, the question became even bigger. Who is stepping up? Zach Harrison has stepped up. He had the Falcons only sack tonight. He had a very, very big stop, right before obviously that disaster play, that essentially sealed it for San Francisco on 3rd and long when Mac Jones was able to convert to Christian McCaffrey. Um, we did see Zach Harrison make a very critical stop. He was around the field all night, so he does get the lone game ball. And, game losers. It goes to this coaching staff. You could obviously give it to the players, and you want to hold the players accountable, but at the end of the day, man, this was a job done by this coaching staff. This coaching staff had to keep this team focused. They had to come up with the right game plan. And it really felt like that, honestly, especially on the offensive side of the ball and looking at Zach Robinson, the game plan is not what it should have been. It truly felt like that early there should have been more of a statement made. There should have been a lot more passes over the middle. And, that could have really have set up a lot of things late to where San Francisco couldn't just sell out, where they did have to account for more things. We did see some deep passes, particularly the big one to Darnell Mooney before halftime, which was also, I think, everything considered, even though Mooney should have gotten out of bounds, it was a bright spot showing that of what can be and starting to unlock that wrinkle of the offense that is very critical. We know Michael Penix likes, his deep ball is one of the strengths of his game and is a big flashy point and selling point for him. But it overall felt like that the game plan wasn't what it should have been. Obviously, the offensive line also has a big part in that, but at the same time, you have to scheme properly, you have to execute, and that also goes into coaching. And even for the defense, it truly did feel like they took a step back. Obviously, you're not going to have 6 sacks and 4 turnovers or 2 turnovers every game, but this was a night where you knew who you had to shut down, and Christian McCaffrey still beat you. Christian McCaffrey he is an amazing player. He is maybe a future Hall of Famer. If, Christian McCaffrey could have just stayed healthy a little more during his career, he'd probably already be a lock for the Hall of Fame. But at the end of the day, man, you got to know what you have to game plan for, and you got to be playing tough. You got to play for 60 minutes. And at the end of the day, especially, that 3rd and 13, I can look at it as easily. You probably should have blitzed Mac Jones there, and you should have done one-on-one. Instead, you dropped 8, and you let McCaffrey get wide open. And I know maybe Jeff Ulbrich would have actually had a better chance filling in for Divine Diablo than J.D. Bertrand. But it starts with the coaching staff. Raheem Morris, he is the head man, and Raheem Morris does not have head coach play calling responsibilities. His responsibilities are essentially to be the CEO and manage the timeouts and just make sure that everything is running smoothly. And things did not run smoothly, so you got to look at Raheem Morris. You got to look at all these guys. It did not feel like the offensive game plan is what it should have been. It felt like execution on defense did take a step back, and all that goes into it. Starts with the coaching staff, and that is what you have to look at. And also the penalties, that's another big thing. The Falcons only had 10 guys out there on that 3rd and 13. That's absolutely asinine on that much of a critical play. So it was definitely a very rough night, but also very sobering for where this team is. So looking forward to what the Falcons do have, which is up next on Sunday, a matchup with the Miami Dolphins back home in the Benz. And when you look at the Dolphins at this point of recording, they have not fired Mike McDaniel. I wouldn't be shocked if they do though later today. Um, so they could potentially have an interim. I would not be shocked actually if maybe Tua heads to the bench and maybe we see Quinn Ewers on Sunday. I don't know if I put money on it, but I think it's a possibility because I think Miami is looking at it as they need a reset and they're going to be looking to do that. If Miami has an interim, that's going to be very scary because these teams typically do tend to look better when these interims take over for their first game. As we've seen, the Falcons, they do not have automatic wins. We saw against the Panthers earlier this year. And I truly think that, after a loss like San Francisco, you have to reevaluate truly where you are and what you need to do. What you need to do is win this game versus the Dolphins. Your season's not over, but you have to take care of these games you're supposed to win. And this is a game right here. This is a bounce back spot. You got to get the win here. There's no other excuse but to come out and get the win on Sunday. So, with that being said, obviously a very sobering game for the Falcons. Really kind of a reality check in an instance of where this team is. And this team is going to have to get better at the end of the day. And I really hate saying that because it's the obvious, but you got to get better with execution. Obviously, Michael Penix is still a young quarterback. You would expect that he's going to probably as we get later into the season and we get into December, because then at that point, he's going to be around his 15th, 16th start, and he'll be about at that point a full year in. So you will essentially then have a full season from him. And at that point, he is getting better. So I would expect your quarterback is going to get better. The team has to get better. The coaching has to get better. Everything has to get better. Play calling has to get better. You have to evolve with the season. You have to adapt. That is the only way that the Falcons are going to be able to contend for a playoff spot at the end of the season. If you look at the final 5 games for the Atlanta Falcons, it is against the Seattle Seahawks, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Arizona Cardinals, the LA Rams on Monday Night Football, and the Saints at home to end the year. That 5 game stretch is going to make or break if you make the playoffs or not. So, right now, you need to just put yourself in a position to where you can actually reach that 5 game stretch having a conversation. You got to win Sunday. You got to win Sunday versus the Dolphins. You're a better team than Miami, but you got to go out there and you got to get the win. So, with that being said, appreciate you all for watching. Remember to like, remember to subscribe, remember to share out. I will see you all in the next one.